It's time for another thrilling episode of Bloody Mavericks. Exceptional guest in the house, Merrill J Buckley, the mastermind behind Buckley Group and phenomenal friend. We'll go deep into significance of genealogy in his life, his experience during life as a Mormon missionary, connection to Australia, and even negotiations by Black Swan Group. And of course, we'll sip some English tea while discussing a subtle influence of that English culture. Merrill's story is a wild ride starting from Wyoming, zigzagging through Chile, Salt Lake City, and eventually settling down into real estate scene in Boise, Idaho. So fasten your seatbelt and join us as we uncover fascinating life journey of this week's Maverick. I'm Matt Mack, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to Bloody Mavericks, where sanity takes a back seat. Merrill, welcome. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, and let's dig in. So I think it's probably quite straightforward for me to go off on the introduction with it, because your background straight from the lineage is quite straightforward. You are American citizen, but you have pure English background as to your knowledge, correct?
Mostly, yes.
So
mostly English.
Okay. Do you know what's that other part that might be?
Not really. I should. I have aunts and uncles who would probably reprimand me for not remembering. But yeah, it's mostly English or very close to it.
Okay. So. I know there's one more part which is super important, and that kind of is a culture within a culture. Is that correct?
What do you mean by that?
I mean the religion that you have been brought up with, that kind of is kind of a close community. This way it builds its own type of culture.
Yeah, 100%.
So you've been a Mormon, raised in the Mormon community, Latter-day Saints, with a modern name to it, I guess.
Yeah, that's been a recent change. The emphasis more on, yes. So to me, they're interchangeable. It sounds like nowadays it's more of an LDS.
Okay.
Latter-day Saints. So for me, we can go with either one, and maybe even talk about that transition.
Awesome. We're gonna definitely dig into that. I'm happy to go and discover, because I know, like myself, I had till recently really limited knowledge about Mormon community, and you are a person who kind of transitioned from that community to regular kind of capitalistic society, I would say, of America.
Yeah,
right?
That's one way to say it.
What's the other way?
It depends who you ask. My parents might explain it a little different off the deep end.
Okay.
But yeah, definitely a bit of a change in belief system and kind of how I wanted to move forward with the second half of my life.
Amazing. Okay. So we're going to come back to that topic, but let's dig into what we have today on the table, which was kind of on the English side. It wasn't a big guess for me. I usually say it's a blind guess to introduce part of your background, your culture to the guest, and kind of see what your reaction gonna be. Wow. With English side of things, English people are famous for the fish and chips, and that's what we have today from a local pub, which is supposed to be one of the best ones. And besides that, you wouldn't be English if you wouldn't have a tea. We will not have a milk with it today, like a lot of English do.
Straight, huh?
Straight Earl Grey today. So dig in and tell me what you think about it.
So this this is interesting, and not from the English standpoint. We could circle back to this in a minute. My dad actually spent a couple of years when he was younger doing a Mormon mission back in the day in Australia.
All right.
And ended up with a couple of Australian friends. And so they've come up to visit multiple times. And one of their favorite things, well, the one who's visited most recently, his favorite thing to do is find the best fish and chip spot in town and go there.
Really?
So it's kind of this like part of my heart, but via, you know, the Aussie friends that my dad brought up.
Oh,
so
right.
because they've kind of pushed more of the fish and chips and
Okay.
looking for the best place in town. So that's how that all kind of came full circle.
That's
So,
awesome.
anyway, I'm not even sure what.
I supposed to bring a spoon, but we don't have it right now, so I'm not gonna be running for it. Just go ahead and try.
Just kind of
get
dig in and
Yeah, dig in. I kind of. Yeah.
I'm gonna pretend like we're in a pub and we're just grabbing it.
That's
off.
right. Exactly how English do go
Yeah.
about it, right?
Yeah, not a lot of hesitance.
No.
I'm gonna
There-
try a little bit of that
Oh yeah.
slaw as well.
Beans, and there's some kind of sauce on the other side as well. So
A bit of tartar sauce.
yeah.
I'm spoiled at home. My wife makes a lot of her own sauces, and so these kind of things that I thought you always had to get at the store, tartar sauce, or
Mm.
like for shrimp, the
Yeah.
cocktail sauce. She'll just whip it up, and yeah, I didn't know you could make that stuff at home. I'm pretty naive in the kitchen.
So you are saying she's super talented on that
She's
front.
really good when it comes to cooking and very creative, and
Amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about it, since you've
this-
been trying a lot of it.
So this tea thing kind of has me. Have you seen Ted Lasso?
Yeah, a
When
little
he-
bit.
And there's kind of this running joke about the tea, and everybody wants to constantly offer him tea, and he just doesn't really love the taste of it, but he wants to be polite. He wants to adapt to their culture.
Same story here.
Very similar story here. I'm gonna sip on this. My kids call it noodle water. So we're gonna see if it's an acquired taste. I could probably choke it down if I had to.
No, you don't have to.
No,
you don't have to.
I'll sip on it just for tradition's sake.
Okay.
One of the things, you know, speaking of kind of the history, and one of the things I appreciate about the LDS culture is their focus on genealogy. They do a lot of family research, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so I had grandparents or aunts who would go travel to the local or the next town over genealogical library. They would do a lot of study on microfiche, microfilm. They were uploading records, uploading, I guess, at the time, scanning, making copies. So that's always been kind of a big emphasis in my family, is the genealogy and where people were born, where they came from. So it is cool to bring in the culture. It wasn't something that was really on my radar a lot growing up. It was more names and dates. It becomes a little bit, it can be a little bit sterile, the way it's approached. But to me, the cool thing about this is this brings in a little bit more of the flavor. So it is on my bucket list to go over to England and see some of those places. My wife's going to Scotland in 2 weeks
Okay.
with her father, who just turned 80. So I think a lot of her family is from there. So eventually, I'm going to get there and check it out.
Yeah, for sure. This is like the journey on discovery of your own background is pretty neat. I must say, from my own experience, it has been life-changing for me, definitely. And
Yeah, it sounds like you have quite a background too.
there is a lot going on my end, for sure. But if you think about your background, and you said you will be thinking about going or planning even to go, have you been in England at all?
Not at all. My only trip to Europe was Italy, and we kind of caught Croatia, Slovenia, a little bit in Montenegro.
Wow.
So I'd love to get over and kind of hit the Great Britain area.
Okay, and try for real how it tastes back in the motherland.
See if it compares.
Yeah.
My Aussie mate will be tagging along if I can get him to come. His love of travel, and he would pop over there quite a bit as well. Sorry, talk with my mouth full here.
Yeah, no worries.
when he would come up, a lot of times he would make that trip through England on his way as well, and always spoke really highly of it.
So you've got still from the friends of your father, you still have connections?
Well, yeah, he met friends, so he was 19, 20 years old at the time, and he met some friends that were kind of his age. And so when he came back and started having kids, I'm actually his third child. So he was probably 30, 35 years old by the time. I really remember them coming up to visit, but they were relatively young at the time. And so growing up on a ranch in Wyoming, they would come out, pretend to work for a while, hope it rained so they could break away, go fishing or go, chase girls or whatever. So they were young enough and energetic enough that they were pretty fun to be around. And sometimes we'd go off to do chores together and then go have some fun together. They were really patient with me. I look back, being a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, for them to kind of take me with them. That's something a mom or a dad will do, but sometimes a friend doesn't have the patience for that.
True. And so you still have connection with them, and you still touch base?
Yep. One of them is still down near Sydney, a small town called Cootamundra, and one of them's in Denver. Has been in Denver for quite a while. So stay in touch. We were able to go see him about 5-6 years ago and spend a little time with Frank as well. So
awesome.
Really, really good friends from Australia. I always wanted to go there so when you grow up LDS, when you decide to go on a mission at age 19 or 20, you just submit your paperwork and they tell you where you're going to go. You can get a little bit of input or tell them if you've had any language study. But they will let you know where they want you to go, and that's where you go. At least that's the way I saw it. I didn't have a lot of choice. So because my dad had gone there and growing up hearing lots of stories about that culture, it was always a place I wanted to go, and I thought that would be really cool. Southern Hemisphere, kind of a different world, and really wanted that cultural experience. I was disappointed when I didn't get to go there, but turns out I still kind of had an experience of my own.
So I grabbed the whole picture. Those friends were also coming from the Mormon community in Australia?
No, actually, it was interesting. My dad met them when he was down there. They became good friends, but never really converted.
Okay.
But yet they stayed lifelong friends. And so the cool thing to me was, it was one of the examples that my dad had always given me. He was really kind and open, and he just liked people in general. He liked people with common interests. But my dad was really good about finding something in other people that he could either relate to or kind of draw out. He's just a very kind of curious person. So he liked people. And I think the friends that he made, even though they never converted, were just friends, because that can be different. That can be difficult in high demand type religions where it can feel like a condition of the friendship to be part of that or not, or relationships can be like that. But one thing that my dad was great about was being really inclusive and open, and he had great friends, within that religion and outside of that religion. So
awesome. So it seems like your father not only went there to kind of, was it a mission, conversion mission kind of? That's thing, or
that's the stated purpose. Everybody goes for that purpose, but then underneath it all, everybody goes for their own reason. There's the kind of common element, and then there's the why do you really go? And I think his mom, my dad at that time in life, he was the youngest of the whole family and kind of had gotten away with pretty much whatever he wanted to do for a few years as a teenager. And I think his mom took him aside and said it would probably serve you to go grow up for a couple of years. And so she strongly advocated for that, according to him. And he respected her on that level and went and did it, never looked back, and was grateful for the experience. So
that's awesome.
He kind of did it more because his mom felt like it was important. But in the process, there's a lot of growing up too, because, you're a 19-year-old kid and you think you know a lot more than you really do.
Yeah.
After a couple of years living on your own, it's a pretty good experience.
So that experience when you are sent to the mission through the Mormon community, is it like you just get the papers, you just what are you actually getting, like as a person, like direction obviously, but are you getting a parish that you are going into? Are you getting a location that you're going to stay?
Yeah, so it's a geographical area. And I'll answer your questions kind of from the way things were in the late 80s,
of course,
early 90s, and some of this may be a little bit different today. So when I went, you're assigned to a geographical area. So mine came, I was looking to open it and see Sydney, Australia, and I saw Osorno, Chile instead. And I'm like, I've heard of Chile, but I've never heard of that town. No idea. But just for context, geographically, Chile's pretty long and slender country.
Yeah.
So Santiago sits in the middle of it, at least the way I envision it on a map. But the lower half, Tierra del Fuego, that entire southern part of Chile is so spread out that geographically we were about the bottom half of Chile, even though it was quite a ways south of Santiago. So overnight bus ride from Santiago south, and then there you are for the next 2 years. And you learn the language. Supposedly you get about 8 to 10 weeks of language training and culture training and religion training in Utah before you leave.
Okay.
So then when you get there, you kind of hit the ground running. And when I got there, I wondered, did they really teach me Spanish? Because what these people were speaking didn't sound anything like,
What you have
what some
been
gringo was speaking back in a half-hearted attempt to teach me. Well, their effort was there. My resistance was probably the problem.
It sounds like there is a part to it where it's organized, but there's a big part to it where you are left on your own and figure it out.
Yeah, it's a little bit, this term might sound a little bit trite, but it's a little bit of a salesman type of a job where you kind of get an area and you get a goal and you get a task and you get a partner to work with, a companion, as they call it. And then you just get after it. You report in. Obviously, there's some guidelines of the do's and the don'ts and some rules of what you can and can't do. But yeah, you just kind of get a geographical area and an overall goal and time to get up, time to go to bed, what day off you get during the week to do laundry, and off you go. So it definitely leaves a little bit of room for 19-year-old kids to put their own spin on it. I think they try to take that out as much as they can, but still, kids are kids, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So yeah, it's a fun experience, but boy, is it ever kind of fly by the seat of your pants sometimes.
So trying to understand, like, once you are there, do you have a job, or do you look for a job that's gonna pay your bills, or are you provided with funds to take care of all your life needs?
Actually, it's neither. Actually, it's self-funded. And so I grew up, socking away a little bit of money here and there. I didn't earn the amount of money I would need to pay for my expenses for 2 years.
Yeah.
My parents definitely had to help out with that. I think even sometimes people in the community will help out with that, but it's fully, the missionaries that go are fully self-funded. At least they were at the time. That might look a little different today. And the other thing that's different, we would pay the cost of living in that area. So if we went to South America, it was a less expensive area than someone who maybe went to Japan or somewhere else.
Yeah,
and so there was a little bit of I'm going somewhere where the living expenses are less at the time. Now, I think today it's more of a throw it all in and divvy out expenses evenly. So I think at the time my parents were struggling a little bit economically, and growing up in Wyoming and kind of coming from that hard scrabble background, is my parents weren't really super affluent. That wasn't really their focus. They were more just nobility and being broke all the time. Sometimes I felt that way, but my dad didn't put a lot of emphasis on money. He just put a lot of emphasis on get up, work hard, do your thing. So anyway, that's kind of a long answer to your question.
If you thinking back, could you draw me a picture of what Mormon community is all about?
Could I do 2 or 3?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, 100%.
It's interesting. That was such a big part of. There's culture and then there's doctrine, and I think the culture of the Mormon community, quote unquote, depends on where you grow up. If you grow up in Utah, it can be very much a fishbowl, and it can create kind of some anxiety and some difficulty around it. I didn't grow up in Utah. However, I did grow up within about 2.5 hours of Salt Lake City, just over the border into Wyoming, and where Salt Lake City may have a high density of LDS people, the town I grew up in was even higher. And so it had this dynamic of, I think at the time, 90+%
Wow.
LDS. And so there was very much a culture of not only are you trying to do your best to do what you're supposed to do, but you're also kind of watching others to see what they're doing as well, and maybe having a little bit too much of an opinion on what other people are or aren't doing correctly, or what what you think they're doing and may or may not even be aware of. So it's a tremendous sense of community, yet at the same time it's kind of got some layers and layers of potential problems with it, with not being able to really just kind of trust your own gut instinct and live kind of genuinely the way you want. There's this kind of desire to shape and fit the mold, especially for somebody wired like me. I'd mentioned to you being the oldest brother in the family. I've got a couple older sisters, but as the oldest boy in the family, I very much felt that pressure. So combined with family dynamics, religious dynamics, do what you're supposed to. And if you make a mistake, just don't let anybody find out about it as much as you can, and just keep moving and try to keep that, checklist. Check all the boxes and do the best you can. So like I said, I'm kind of stumbling over my words, but it's a blessing and a curse is what I'm trying to say.
I get you. And on that note, are there any, like, obviously there are good sides and bad sides to it, and you struggle with finding the balance in between, obviously, like in every religion, I would assume. But if you think about the Mormon community, are there any points, like, from my understanding, it is a Christian part of Christianity, right? Correct?
Yes. As far as the belief system, and religions will debate back and forth as to whether Mormons are Christian. Sidestepping that debate, the LDS Church is 100% about Christ being our way back to God, and then everything else kind of builds on that, and the family and having that come along with it. So yes, 100%.
Are there any differentiators in the LDS type of living? I don't know, community building, way of doing business, or normal life, or restrictions in a way? Because, like, you've got the Amish community, which is super restricted. Just so people understand and not confuse one with another, right?
Yeah, and I think as I look around, a lot of the really, I guess one of the terms you could say is high demand religion, really strict religions is what I would have called it growing up. Yeah, all of those things you asked, culture, food, behavior. I'm trying to remember what your question, the differentiators, is that what you asked me? So yeah, there's some really distinct, so we're filming this in Toronto, right?
That's right.
And
correct.
I mentioned to you last night the history of the LDS Church is really just across the way here in upstate New York. That's where it all started, and then kind of moved from there. They moved out further west and eventually ended up out in Utah. So the Mormon religion is really big on God bringing the gospel back to the earth in the way that it was in Christ's time, and that's kind of a reset that now, because of all the problems with translations of the Bible and all the different interests of greed and power and people, different translations that it had kind of been bastardized, lost, misconstrued along the way. And so I'm kind of just trying to keep a 30,000 foot overview to not get in the weeds too much. But yeah, there's definitely, Mormons look at themselves as people who belong to God's restored truth here on earth. And so now it's kind of reset the clock. We've got things back in order and moving forward.
So it sounds like kind of a Bible chosen nation or chosen tribe of gods.
Yeah, 100%. And then also, in addition to the Bible, the Mormons believe that there's a second book. So, the Bible kind of happened. I'm kind of going back to my missionary hat. The Bible occurred in the Old World. The Book of Mormon occurred in the Americas. Kind of simultaneously, just to keep things simple. And now we have two witnesses of Christ. And what's bad about that? If one witness of Christ is good in the Bible. I didn't realize this was going to turn into religion, but this is kind of interesting review. What's better than having two?
Yeah.
and 3 or 4, as long as they all, complement each other and different perspectives of the same time period. So
For me, why I'm bringing it up and asking those questions is because I just want to understand, and it gives me a new perspective on a huge community.
yeah,
Right? There are millions of Mormons in the world, in different parts of the world, started in US and then moved across.
And for me, this is an interesting exercise too, because spoiler alert, I stepped away about a decade ago, but yet my entire family and my former wife's entire family are still strong, believing, actively pursuing, those goals. And it was always a challenge for me to maintain a level of respect, because religion can be a very tenuous topic, and sometimes due to the fact that the family and the long-term success of the family is attached to that, if someone steps away, you're potentially breaking that bond. You're breaking that chain that holds the family together and is kind of getting everybody home.
That's right.
So it can be very stressful for a family. And so it's interesting we're talking about this. I've had to learn over the last 10 years to be okay with my own feelings and opinions while simultaneously being respectful of my family's feelings and opinions.
Yeah.
So I can't get too far off one way or another. And it's like, how do you be genuine and authentic with your feelings while still being loving and respectful of someone who holds a different feeling or opinion?
True.
So it's been really good for me to come out of that really rigid belief system structure to now be able to walk both sides. I almost compare it to two languages, right? Mm-hmm. If you can speak Spanish and English, or Italian and Spanish, then you can communicate with both parties.
That's right.
But if you can only speak one, then that's all you know. Then that's all you know.
Yep.
And that's okay too. That's just, you have never learned another language. So someone needs to speak to you in that language to have a dialogue. Sure. Might be a little oversimplified, but I do think my having stepped away but still being a part of my family, my responsibility is to be respectful and to be able to speak both languages and to be kind about it, be loving about it, because those people really do matter to me in my life. So I don't know if that helps clarify that.
It does. It definitely does. And it is a struggle, especially if you are stepping away. It's like there's a lot of nuances that come with it, but there's potential conflict. There's potential big disconnect.
Yeah.
From the environment, from the family, from the relationships that you already had before, and being a black sheep of a family usually brings consequences to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of things that I realized actually thinking about our relation and us talking about different subjects before, that there are, like, I realized this morning that actually every person that's so far been on this podcast, I had some type of connection to.
Wow.
And today I realized that I went through kind of similar experience, because when I was a teenager, my parents joined a neo-catechumenate, which is a movement within Catholic Church to evangelize the rest of the laik world, so to say. So all the atheists who are going towards losing the faith.
Okay.
Basically, the way is to continue and deepen the relationship with the God, with the Christ, and going deep into it. And I was thinking about it actually, that we went on some kind of missions, short-term, but short-term missions as well. We've been going around the Europe and singing and reading Bible and stuff like that. And I just realized this today, that there is similarity to it.
That's interesting. Yeah, and my tendency is to kind of dig a little deeper on that, because I'm so curious, especially after some of my experiences. I'd love to know more about that, and I don't know if that takes us off track.
I don't want to keep it a religious podcast, because
I'll leave that up to you.
there is a lot of feelings that can be triggered by that, and there are two main topics that are usually uncomfortable for a lot of people, which is obviously, maybe three, some, which is religion, politics, and I would add money to a lot of people, which I love to talk about.
I thought you were going to talk about sex as the third one. Maybe we'll stick to religion, politics, and money.
Yeah, maybe. Let's do that. Because we're going to keep on finding another one.
Yeah, so exactly. Got your hands full with those three.
Oh, yes, for sure. 100%. So I don't feel like money is a taboo. And we talk on this podcast about the money and
That's great.
The ways how to make it, how to go about it, what does it teach us and stuff like that. But I want to kind of circle back to your background, to the background that you are carrying, the community. Is there anything like on the English side that you think makes you do things in a certain way or go through life in making decisions a certain way that the English part is like evident in your life that you can?
I'm going to be really excuse me if I can speak again.
No worries.
I'm going to be really honest and just say I'm not sure. I think there probably is, because I'm a big believer that kind of our DNA drives some of our decisions, or maybe more than we realize sometimes.
Yeah.
The biggest one for me that I'm more conscious of is growing up in Wyoming. Those ancestors of mine that came over set up in some really harsh places, some cold climates, some sparsely populated areas, and probably the mid 1800s. A lot of the West wasn't really colonized.
Yep.
Sorry, you might have to edit this out.
No worries.
So we talked briefly, I think, prior about the first president of the LDS Church that kind of took the members out into the Salt Lake Valley, became one of the greatest colonizers.
Yep.
Brigham Young, I think he colonized over 200 and some odd communities. So having grown up in one of those communities and kind of looking at it like, so just to kind of put this into context, Wyoming has about, for every 10 people population-wise, 10 people in Colorado, there's one in Wyoming. So Colorado has 10 times neighboring state, high elevation, mountains, very similar dynamic, but Wyoming just doesn't have the population. There's not a lot of people. So what that leaves is the people who are there, we tell ourselves it's some amazing thing and it's some sign of strength or nobility if we can push through the brutally cold winters, the dark nights, driving to the next town over to date a girl because the girls you've grown up with are kind of like your sisters and you've known them. So that kind of Wyoming, just hard nose, brutal wind, go out and do it, is very much ingrained in me. Mm-hmm. It's the way my dad and my grandpa and a lot of those people were. I have a funny feeling that might have come from people who are willing to leave Europe, get on a boat, go to heaven knows where, and end up in these environments and still make a go of it. So if I chase that all the way back, then sure, that makes sense that a lot of those people were kind of mavericks. They were kind of, I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing here. I'm going to cash out anything I can, and I'm going to get on a boat and go. And I truly do want to know a little bit more about that. And this has been a good time for me to kind of reflect and maybe go back and research a little bit more of that history or go there. I've had a cousin or two who's gone and shared with the family. Mm-hmm. And I do think they came from very similar, blue collar jobs, hard-nosed people.
For sure.
So
the funny thing is that this circumstance brings some people into reflection and kind of pushes towards coming back and even thinking about it, about the background, and that it actually is important to them. Yeah, which I believe it's awesome. I feel like you kind of embrace the heritage that you are carrying, both from ancestral part, but also the community part, and that's what you just mentioned, meaning the hard work, the plowing through the cold, the wind, the dark nights, and I fully understand living in Norway and in Canada. That we have similar.
You've been in some of those similar environments, and for me, it's multifaceted. Grew up in a small town where there wasn't a lot to do, so sports were a very big thing. Another thing you and I touched on prior, we had, as it narrows your focus, we had some pretty high standards on our sports teams. I did not play on our high school football team. I was the water boy because I was 5'1", 98 pounds when I was a freshman, and I just didn't think it was in my future best interest. And I always struggled with that decision because I lived in a town where you played football or the girls played volleyball, and really good. USA Today did an article on this tiny little town of 500 people in Wyoming, I think back in the 90s, because of the amount of titles year after year that they had won. And that was kind of in the middle. Now some of these coaches have retired with that many more. But like I said, for a town that size to hit the USA Today, that's a pretty big deal. So there's a lot of pride in that. There's a lot of pride in the culture and the religion and doing the right thing. And so there's like layers and layers and layers of just do the right thing, do your best, do what's right. And I use that term right kind of loosely because I do struggle with that a little bit, but at the time that was 100% my mindset. Do the right thing. And if you fall short, sugarcoat it, hope it doesn't come up, and move on to the next.
So loosely, you struggle with it, and it seems like it is a word that is kind of controversial.
Yeah, for me it is just internally. I don't know how others feel, but for me, I struggle with the word right or wrong, because that can be a trap, I think, in life, for sure.
Oh yeah, and it depends on the circumstance and the person and the point of view, all of that.
Yeah, and I grew up in an environment that didn't give me that message. I grew up in an environment that gave me the opposite message, which is like, no, there is a right way, and this is the way you do it, just because, it's just the right way. That's what you got to do. So self-reflection or studying outside the lines or pursuing other interests. I probably would have enjoyed being on a golf team. We didn't have a golf team. So you played football, and then when football season was over, you played basketball. When basketball season was over, if you wrestled. And it's funny, this came up for me, come from a family of some really good high school wrestlers. We're talking state champions and at different weight classes. And I grew up idolizing some of these cousins that I had. And then all of a sudden I come along and I want to play basketball. I'm like, Dad, the weirdest thoughts go through your head. Dad, is it okay if I play high school basketball? Would you be mad? Would you disown me? Like, who cares, right? But at the time, it was just wrestle, because, a bunch of guys roughing livestock and throwing hay in the summertime. And I just wasn't. I wasn't that big. I wasn't that strong, and I wasn't that talented. So anyway, those are some of the kind of the psychological things that you go through in those watershed moments of, I got to take a stand for myself. I'm not really comfortable going against, and how much I struggled with that. It's funny, as you're talking about this, I struggled to go against the norm, whether that's the cultural norm, the societal norm, the family norm. I really struggled with that growing up. I was very much wired to be a pleaser. My mom really hammered it into my head, you're respectful to women. And so high school, I couldn't get my sister out the door on time. I'm like, come on, we're late. It's 20 below, 30 below. So I'd go start the car, warm it up, and she was still late. So I'd finally get my buddy to come pick me up. And then my mom's like, hey, before you leave, start the car for your sister. So it'll be, and I'm like, what do you mean start the car? I got to go arrange another ride because she's not ready, but yet I still have to start the car so it can be warm when she leaves late. And still to this day, I shared this story with her a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I still, 55 years old, I still harbor right? So I think that's how life is, kind of an adventure, and things that we struggle with, somebody else doesn't even realize we're struggling.
True. It's and it's a hard and lonely journey if you go against the grain, right?
Oh, because
people will point fingers towards you, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's one of the things that I struggle with. We talk about that double-edged sword, and being a very Christian, very loving religion, and very, love your neighbor. And the only thing more important than that is loving God. Those are the two biggest things you can do. But yet go ahead and step outside those lines, or step outside of that, that narrow channel. It doesn't always feel the same in practice as it does, sitting in a meeting on Sunday. Sure. And if there's one thing I'd love to see more of, it's more of putting that into practice regardless of what that person chooses. Yeah. Loving someone has nothing to do with condoning their behavior. Yeah. And just because you love someone who does something different doesn't mean you have to go. Quick story. my dad, I was 7 or 8 years old. Some old sheep herder had come and done some work for us on our ranch. And after, they kind of went their separate ways, and my dad and I went into town. We lived about 10 minutes out of town. Went into town, pulled up across the street from the old bar and Eddie's barber shop. And he walked in. I remember just watching him walk across the street. He walked in, bought something in a brown bag, came back out, some bottle in a brown bag, set it on the seat between us in the truck, and then just started driving back to this guy's place. And finally I looked at him like, well, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? He's like, well, this guy came and did some work for me. This is how he wanted to be paid. So I got him a fifth of whiskey or whatever, and that's how I'm paying him. I'm like, all right. And we never really discussed it again since, because you talked about some of the do's and don'ts of the Mormon religion.
Yeah.
There are some very much do's and don'ts on, food and drink, coffee, alcohol, cigarettes, Earl tea, breaking the word of wisdom right now with this noodle juice. So it's interesting, and they're very cut and dry. Some of them people have questions about, but most of those are pretty cut and dry. So my dad doing this, where some people might have thought that was, setting a bad example, or why is he buying alcohol, or why is he doing this? And to me, it was my dad demonstrating love to the guy who had done work for him. It was my dad reciprocating what that guy wanted.
And respecting it.
And respecting it and not judging it, not being too hung up on it. It's just like, I got what I needed out of the deal. He needs to get what he wants out of the deal, and that's okay. And it's funny, that was such a symbolic moment for me. A couple of years ago, we started looking at a piece of real estate that we wanted to buy and where we wanted to move some money. And last fall in October, we actually bought that building. So we bought the old bar. Now I own that building where, sorry, it's a little bit emotional for me, but where sat across the street. And just my dad, by going in and doing that, not by saying anything or telling me anything, but just doing that and being okay with that, was such a life lesson for me. I don't even think he realized what, how much that assisted me later on in life. So kind of cool into the story. Well, update on the story, I guess.
It is amazing that those small moments can trigger the ripple effect.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned earlier, there is a big difference between loving someone and loving them regardless. Loving them because you have to love them. Yeah. Because that's what you are told to do, instead of really truly kind of understanding and not judging the other person, right? Yeah. I think today's religion, both coming from strict Catholic background, I think that's what thrown me personally away as well, is that this is the funny thing is, this is the way. It's like this Mandalorian new Star Wars series where they repeat that phrase, this is the way, this is how we do it, this is the way. Yeah. No, it's not. This is not the only way to do it. Yeah. Like, you can still be respectful, still be loving, but not necessarily so so rigid. So rigid. Yeah. And circling back to what you just said, sometimes I believe you can love someone or something for the wrong reason, but still eventually get there. Yep. I think love is a choice, not an emotion. There's a lot of reasons why I feel this way, but I also feel like the more you choose to love something or somebody, the more you learn to love it, because you start seeing the good, you start seeing the beauty, you start, whether it's this noodle juice that you got here, that I eventually, if I drank this every day, in about 2 weeks, I would probably start to really crave it and look forward to it and really enjoy it. So I think our taste change, I think our views change, we learn. For sure. Sorry, I'm getting a little nuanced here, but I think we learn things about that person or about that thing that we really can grow to love and appreciate, taking the time. Definitely. I'll even admit, when I first saw you, and you're a little more serious, you're a little more assertive, and I'm like, oh, who's this guy? He's pretty intense. And quickly, just by having a little bit of conversation with you and learning a little bit about your background, I'm like, wow, I want to know more about this guy. There's a lot going on under the surface. So yes, I think making that choice to love someone really leads us into finding out the lovable things about them. Yes. Am I twisting that in knots? No, I don't think so. It's I think that's why I love culture so much, because it gives you such a broad perspective and like with that's why I'm digging into the Mormon community, because that's a culture in itself, that like every religion, and especially kind of enclosed religion, I would say. Some people might call them sects, and really directing, like there are obviously, where people are involved, they're always going to be sidetracking and all of that, but this is not the topic of this of it. But it's once the tight community is built, there is an internal culture that is that is growing with it parallelly, right? That makes people unique, that makes them
and it, again, a double-edged sword. To be redundant, we are tribal people. We are tribal creatures.
That's right.
There's a really good book titled Tribe that I just got through reading, and it kind of talks about the early history of this area. Fantastic read. And so to see the community that I grew up in, and the culture that I grew up in, and the religion and the state that I grew up, there was so much pride in who we were. But yet we also knew we were kind of the outsider, the one-off, you know. There are a lot of LDS members, but on a bigger scale, it's not one of the bigger worldwide religions. State of Wyoming, really, really sparse population. So a lot of those things that we took pride in were because we were unique and different. That's right. Does that make sense? But then that became our community. That became our battle cry.
But in the same time, if you think about it, if you are a unique community, you are the black sheep, and you are being excluded as well. Whereas actually communities like this, which pride themselves in being so special, they should promote people who are different, who are seeing things different, because this way they can grow as well as a community. Don't you think?
I think they can, but I don't think, I'm going to say people who are in that are a little fearful of that, because it's a very homogenous world.
It is.
And often it's easy to say the way we keep this special is to stay homogenous. You and I know, having kind of traveled and experienced and learned other languages, that the real magic is to bring in the difference. But it's a very, very disconcerting feeling. And a fishbowl sounds like a derogatory term, but it is a very isolated environment, and some people want to keep it that way. Even I mentioned going back and buying the old building that used to house the bar and Eddie's barbershop and the laundromat. Well, the bar and the billiards that were painted on the front of the building, one of them has been painted over. Guess which one? Because as that town changed hands and somebody decided they didn't want that there, and they had so one of my first goals is to go back and restore what that looked like, bar and billiards, and then whatever we do from there is going to be based on that. But seeing those things, it constantly reminds me of that tendency to want to be homogenous and want to be all the same. And that's the danger that we can't see when we're inside that.
True.
And it's till we step out of it, we're like, oh, wow, there is so much more. And still, I can be grateful for what came out of that. I don't have to discount it. I don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And
the thing is also, it starts with small steps. We were talking yesterday about it as well during our lunch, that if you are moving that small fish tank everywhere you go, you say you go to different country, but then you stay in your fishbowl of being a resort, and you don't exit the gates of it to learn about that culture, to learn about those people, see how they really live, what are the circumstances, what they are dealing with, what are the struggles daily, it is hard for people to understand and grasp the idea of world being beautiful in its own way, and kind of embracing that differences.
And I'll probably offend a few members of your audience by saying this, but if you've only been to Mexico and stayed at an all-inclusive in Cabo, or you've only been to Mexico and stayed at an all-inclusive in Tulum or Playa, have you really been to Mexico? You've been to a really nice beach, but have you really been to Mexico? And so having and I was guilty of the same thing. I lived with the Chilenos. I lived with them in their home. We rented a room. They cooked for us. They did our laundry, which was kind of nice, by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't have that service at home. My mom's like, do it your damn self. But it was really fun to integrate and immerse ourselves in the culture, but yet we still kind of carried a little bit of an entitled, we have God's message for you. So thing I loved the most, we integrated in their culture. We learned the language and we learned a lot about it. And I love those people. The thing I would do different was maybe let down we have the right message from God and you need to hear this from us. I was 19 years old, right? Yeah. So at the same time, I would have been a little more interested in their opinions as well and learning from them some of those religious things, and whether it's about Catholicism, which is huge down there, or other religions that people have and practice. So yeah, there's always something more to learn, right?
There is, and on the note of being young and seeing that picture, it is really easy to kind of, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever people might think about it. But when you are young, you are easily manipulative.
Yeah.
You can be manipulated quite easily, and once that doctrine is ingrained in you, like, it's really hard to get rid of it after a war.
Yeah, and stay the course, don't rock the boat was huge in my world, but also being wired the way I'm wired and being wired for responsibility. And as I mentioned earlier, being the oldest son, I had no interest in rocking the boat. That was the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to support the cause. I wanted to be part of the team. I wanted to do the right thing. And I wanted my parents to be proud of me and also kind of respect my brothers and sisters. Because in our family, like, your family name is a big deal and things like that as well. So I didn't want to, tarnish any of that. So imagine coming to an age a little further down the road where you got to take a hard look at some of those things and be like, man, do I really want to be the person to poison the well? Do I really want to be the person to upset the apple cart? I don't know. That wasn't something I would have been able to handle when I was younger, because I avoided that at all costs. And it kind of shaped how my first half of my life went.
It's so interesting because I feel the connection on the part of trying to fit into the mold and trying to understand it and being not really, like, I wouldn't say a people pleaser on my end, but still I definitely wanted my parents to be proud. And I remember realizing it at some point that it's not gonna happen, and that's kind of it.
That's a tough realization.
And that changed all. We've been talking about this similar situation where being trying to be accepted for me myself was a period of time when I wanted to have my parents proud of me, and at some point realized that that's not gonna happen. And that changed everything for me. Then I became, like, intentionally a black sheep. I went on my full throttle, my own route, against the grain, everything they were saying, and that caused a lot of pain, definitely between me and my mother especially, and a lot of fights that we went through. But with the time being, and still I'm repeating it probably for 100th time right now. If not my wife, I wouldn't be even kind of realizing how my processes work and how I'm reacting, how I'm building it, and then kind of working it through to kind of build my own way of coping, and build my own way of accepting who I am fully. Accepting my background and kind of not really giving an opportunity for other people to tell me what I am or what I should be doing in my life. This is my life. And I realized, like, that's super fascinating when you just said that. Myself personally, I went through those stages. First was looking for that acceptance, then being everything against it. Like, I'm gonna fucking rip it apart and do it my own way. I don't give a fuck whatever anyone says. And then working it through, and then just simply accepting who I am, that yes, I am different because of this and that.
Yeah.
And living with it and being trying to be more loving towards other people, not necessarily rocking every boat because I can, obviously, but I can go through the life as an asshole and fuck everything up and burn all the bridges. But is that the real meaning of life? No.
Well, and I'm sure there's some psychological, people with a lot of letters behind their names that can explain this dynamic. But to me, what I've noticed is just simply, it looks to me like it's a muscle. Like, we have to go from being that more pleasing or acquiesce, I'm going to do the things that I need to do because that's the best path, to then realizing that that's causing some other problems and that's not always serving. So then we jump to the other side of the pendulum. We swing it all the way over and we think we have to react in a very adverse, negative way. Not the best, but it in a weird way, it's building a muscle that we're going to use later down the road. True. We're starting to strengthen this ability to stand on our own 2 feet. We do it in a really rough way in the beginning, a really rough kind of bull in the china shop, break things, destroy things, damage. And that's what I was touching on earlier. I had seen other people do that in regards to religion. When they would step away or choose something different, they would create this right-wrong dynamic within their family. Arguments, debates, Bible thumping, those kind of things. And I just didn't see any value in that. But yet I still did that in other areas of my life. I still kind of know, like, no, don't tell me what to do, or I'm just going to do this come hell or high water. And then eventually, as we build that muscle and settle in a little bit, okay, I can still do this and be loving to the people around me. I can still stand on my own 2 feet and I don't have to have all this collateral damage. So crazy though it may be, I do think it's part of the process a lot of times. I wish it was easy. I wish it was different, but it is what it is, right?
It definitely is. And the funny and entertaining part to the process is it is evolving. You are the best example of master communicator, someone who is working on it hard on and plowing through the weeds and trying to find the best way kind of to communicate. Like we both met on this amazing training of Black Swan Group. We went there to learn for our businesses, to negotiate better and to be better at what we do. But you were like, I remember you standing up and asking those questions about your relationship, and I realized that, and after you there were a couple other people asked the same type of questions, and then I remember thinking about it and also asking question about the relationship. Like, suddenly it clicked that what we were learning is not merely a sales tactic or negotiation or diplomacy. It is a communication, and it can serve in so many different facets of the life that it is truly amazing.
Well, and a little bit of plug for the Black Swan Group. Chris Voss had written a book probably more, a few years ago, I don't know how many, I'll get it wrong, called Never Split the Difference. And when I first heard of it and picked it up, hey, here's a negotiating book that might help me in business, because I like to negotiate. I'll do a used car deal and try to get an extra $20, whatever, right?
That's right.
And my wife can probably attest to that more than anybody. She's like, yeah, you're kind of an asshole because you like to negotiate in a certain way. And so the Black Swan information originally appealed to me from a business standpoint. And I quickly, when I picked up the book, I'm like, oh shit, this is my marriage. This is my relationship with family members. This is my relationship with friends. This goes way beyond negotiating a car deal or a business deal or a real estate deal, right? And all of a sudden I felt this overwhelming desire to get better at the very thing we were talking about before, which is, how do I hold a different opinion than someone without damaging or destroying the relationship? And is it even possible? Because prior to that, I didn't care. I'm like, well, if they feel different than me, they'll let me know. Because what do? If I feel different, I'll tell you. Well, then, of course, they would do the same. And I just kind of went through life naively assuming that would happen. Not the case, by the way. but that's how I looked at it. And then in that training, as we divided up into kind of our natural styles, and according to the research that Chris Voss will quote quite a bit, we're all kind of equally divided amongst 3 different styles. There's assertive, there's accommodator, and there's analyst.
That's right.
And then once you kind of know where you are, you see the different styles and how you interact. And my wife is definitely an accommodator, and I'm definitely an assertive. And you, I think, were in that same room with me.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, where I would have trouble getting questions answered from her, getting information from her, maybe I wasn't really open to it, so she just stopped trying. I was now in a room full of people where a third of them were accommodator. I'm like, I'm going to take this moment, I'm going to ask some questions, because they're not going to try to chop my balls off in the process. They're not tired of listening to me rant and rave, and they might be honest with me without the fallout.
That's right.
They might be able to be honest with me in a way that I can hear them, that would then serve in my relationship when I go back home. And so what I've learned is, if I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to ask this, is going to make me, not going to frame me in the best light, but I got to ask this because I want to know. Typically other people have a similar question, maybe not the whole room, but a few other people are going to share that struggle. And that's what I love about kind of group type trainings, and I've come to really enjoy, is that kid in junior high who wasn't going to raise his hand unless he absolutely knew the answer, which I must have been fun to deal with at that time, but I was definitely afraid of being wrong, has been like, no, the magic is in being wrong. The magic is in putting yourself out there, because somebody else is probably struggling and they just need a little bit of encouragement to be more open, or they'll learn from my experience. I'll look like a jackass, I guess, and in the process somebody else might benefit. And that time and time and time again has proven true. So I've used that as kind of a springboard to come out of that. Just do the right thing, be the good boy, to actually, the more I can put myself out there, the more it will benefit other people struggling with something similar. So I'm glad you shared that, because that's the first time I've heard that from you.
There is, first of all, it seems like we are on the same page where we both kind of went there expecting one thing and got something way different than we expected. Second of all, another plug from my side to Black Swan and Chris's team. Like, they are doing some tremendous job out there, because they are opening people's eyes, and the conversation that they are starting. Thanks to that, we are sitting in front of each other today, and thanks to that, we've got our small four people team that we negotiate between each other, and we improve our skills and try to build on top of our communication skills, both to better our personal lives but also a business perspective. So that's also an amazing side effect of that training. And
I just want,
go ahead.
I don't want to take you off your train of thought, but that first morning, it was the 4 of us that sat at the same table together. And we probably had a table for 6, but there was only 4 of us there. And we have gone on and kind of done some practicing with each other and working kind of as a smaller group. And I got to give you props, and Ramon, part of our group. 2 out of the 4 people in our group, English is not their first language. So we are doing something that is stretching us, and we have to shift and grow and adapt. And you guys are doing even more, because you're doing this in a second, third, fourth language. And I have the world of respect for you guys being able to do this in not your native tongue. So props to you guys. This is a stretch for me to just stop speaking asshole, right? But you guys are doing it in other languages than your native. So
but I cannot say that I'm the best in my native language either. I've always been struggling with, especially Polish is so super terribly hard to learn language. And my mother has a teacher's degree in Polish language, so she's been repeating me so many times. I think at some point she gave up. Doing you so.
You were the worst student your mother had.
Yeah, I'm reckless, and I'm like, you cannot like deal with that on top of my orthography problems and all of that. And I know thank you for saying that. I know, like, speaking in a different language, it is my first language right now, being in Canada, in Toronto. That's the language that I use the most. However, sometimes I find myself thinking in, because I have been speaking a couple different languages. Sometimes I'm pronouncing something like it's supposed to be in Norwegian, or it's how it's pronounced in. I'm thinking in a way. I'm still having those processes of first thinking if it's a complicated a subject or a discussion that we are having. Sometimes my thought processes is going double stages, so I first need to figure it out and then go deeper into the minutia or theory or whatever, the debate on the subject, right?
Yeah, it's one of the challenges of learning. So it seems like learning two languages is pretty straightforward. My question is, it's a little off topic, but when you add that third or that fourth, now you're mixing multiple sets of vocabulary. That's got to bring its own problems, not to get off in the weeds in that, but that's why I have so much respect for what you're doing and stretching yourself in that area because of the multi-language facet that you carry. So
sometimes it is difficult, but in the same time I'm doing it to exit my comfort zone as well, trying to get better with it. And sometimes I'm getting annoyed when someone is saying that I've got a Polish accent, because if you could and I'm like always trying to stay there, like you can put the next Polish person. Not that Polish people do not have really good English, but there are different ways that people speak. And I think at the end of the day, I'm a product of my own travels, and I've got my speaking patterns. Like I can say one word in Polish way of speaking it in English, using it in the English way, or Norwegian because of the Norwegian influence, right? And or the Russian part that I've been learning as well. It's like there are those minutiae of the languages that twist and turn while you are in the weeds.
Yeah.
And talking about it.
Yeah, so it shows a lot of courage to go, because a lot of the research is really about the underlying communication, not so much the words. And so now kind of holding what we've been talking about up against what part of communication really is the most impactful. Tone, body language, tempo, shut the hell up sometimes and listen. Like those things are way more crucial than necessarily conjugating a verb correctly or pronunciation factors. So for me, that's been good too. I like to think I'm a good listener, but I'm also a really good talker, and I can be like, hey, let me just explain this to you one more time. Maybe you'll get it this time. And it doesn't serve, that mindset doesn't serve, and I get trapped in that sometimes. So it's good for me to remember it. Sometimes it's not even about the actual words. So sorry, I don't know if I cut you off, but
no, it's it is multiple levels to it, and I think as you go and learn your communication, and as we are training ourselves to be better at it, then we start to add those small layers to it. This way, not only we think what to say before we say it, which is usually as assertive as for us. We say it first and then we think about it. That's how it started. So reversing that process is a big one for people with our personalities. But then once you think about it before you speak it, then you add the level of the voice you are using, the intonation, the tempo, and all of that, late night DJ voice and all of that crazy
stuff. Have you
stuff.
considered reading romance novels for audiobooks? You've got a pretty good late night FM DJ voice.
That might be a thing, but I guess
different podcast, right?
Different podcast. Okay. And if I add the twist of Polish pronunciation, that might throw people off. So
there we go. I'll try not to get too distracted with your voice. But you did a great job with that.
There's a lot to it. this is a whole process for both you and me. Like
Yeah.
we are going through it, and the best example of it being like when we spoke about this multiple times already. When we are faced with the most difficult negotiation ever, usually it is the negotiation with our loved ones,
Right.
because not only there is a problem involved, not only we know that person, we know their patterns, the way they talk, the way they lead the conversations, but there's emotions involved,
Oh yeah.
because we, through the process, we built so many mechanisms of communicating with that person, that kind of stepping backwards and kind of looking at our conversation and communication might be a big thing, right?
Yeah, 100%. And to kind of illustrate your point, you and I spent 2 or 3 days together in Nashville. We even stayed an extra day, and it gave us time to get to know each other
That's
a
right.
little bit more. And then I came home back to Boise, and I'm coming out of that wanting to be a better communicator, better listener, more willing to see, like say in my marriage, more willing to see where my wife's coming from and what she's feeling, and to be able to articulate that so that she can know she's being heard, because I truly do love and care about her, and her feelings are important. What I was met with was a whole different dynamic. And what I was met with was a wife who was used to be married. You mentioned the word assertive earlier. So we talked about her being part of this accommodator group and some of those dynamics. Well, you and I are assertives. We want to be heard. We want to be understood. And we just want to know you heard us and respect us, and then you can go do whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, as long as you hear me out, I'm not going to get in the way. However you want to move forward is fine. That's up to you, but just at least hear me out. Don't cut me off, interrupt me, or, and I'll reciprocate the same.
Yeah.
So some of those assertive tendencies is there's a really high need to be heard. I had battered her with that for so many years. Where did she think I was going when I flew to Nashville for a few days to learn how to do more of this, and then come home and hit her over the head with it? So she was ready. She wasn't having any of this. So I'm coming home like a baby giraffe, trying to kind of implement some of these new skills, be a little softer, be a little more loving, a little more, a better listener, listen on a deeper level. And she just hits me with both barrels. She's ready. She's not going to get, coerced or manipulated or whatever term she was wondering in her head. So it was really difficult coming home from that. At the beginning of that, I was a little bit resentful. I'm like, hey, I'm trying here. I'm trying to be a better, kind of my victim story, right? Trying to do this, trying to be better, trying to this. And then I thought, you know what? Wait a minute. Maybe her hitting me really hard right out the gates is going to force me to decide if I'm really serious about being a better listener, about being more empathetic, about truly seeing and hearing where she's coming from. This might just be a test to see if I'm serious or not, and it might get my game up to speed where it needs to be anyway. So once I shifted that perspective within my own, I guess this is kind of a lifeline for people out there who are struggling to communicate with their partners, you can resent it, or you can be grateful for it and step your game up. And it's really a choice, and it's really going to probably determine where things go from there. So that went from a really negative thing in my mind to a really positive thing.
Yeah, I know through our conversation and you describing the situation back again, you went such a long way from when we've been talking about the communication style and the struggles you are having in your own life with communicating, and then applying the skills, but also being grateful for the challenges that your wife is providing you, actually the training grounds to implement it. It is awesome to see.
Yeah, and I don't want to disparage her. Some of my concerns, we have been through a lot as a family. We've been a lot, like, especially her with her own family dynamics. She's been through a couple of crisis. We've shared them as a family, but it's really hit her the most directly. And so being in that space, what she needed from me was to be loving, supportive, and empathetic, not somebody who's going to come in and just, you got to hear me tell everybody what they need to do or hear. So it was really an effort to be able to see the world through her eyes as much as possible, because I felt like the stakes had been raised And like I said, you can kind of choose when and how we jump into that. But the stakes in our family have been raised so high. I had to get my shit together. I had to step it up, and hopefully I'm getting there. I don't know if I'm there or not, or if I ever will be, but whatever there is, I just had to step up that piece of my communication.
I I feel definitely that you are on the right path, and the question becomes: is there an aim, or the path still is the aim, the way going forward, and making those small tiny baby steps along the way, improving one bit at a time, and just getting better bit by bit.
Yeah.
If that is the goal, usually a lot of people are saying that if you are going after something and then you achieve it, you can burn out easier.
Yeah.
But if you constantly are about the journey, not the destination.
Well, two things. Chris, who started Chris Voss, who started the Black Swan Group, he says, it's a perishable skill and we're always learning, and you got to get your reps in, you got to test drive it, which I love, because then you're doing things like talking to the guy at Starbucks, or talking to the lady at the bus stop, and you're just getting that communication practice and seeing how people react. My son Parker and I will talk quite a bit. He's my youngest, and we'll kind of talk about building on these skills as if there's some way to finally arrive and just have it under your belt. At this age, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I've gone from thinking I would arrive to being crystal clear I won't. So what I've done instead, and especially in my marriage, is I've tried to kind of set a lot of that aside and just say, you know what, in this interaction, how did she respond? How did she feel? How did she go away from this interaction? That's telling me whether in this moment I'm on track or off track. And if there's a problem, or something's not working, or the communication just comes to a grinding halt, it's like, well, I got to regroup and come back next time, and I got to tweak this.
That's right.
If the communication goes well and she feels safe and can share where she's at or what she's feeling, then we are on, a little bit more of a healthy track, and I want to do more of that. So I've gone from it's a destination to it's just something to read the person I'm with. How are they feeling? How are they experiencing it? How are they responding? And that'll tell me everything I want to know.
It looks like you went through the whole process of looking for that golden pill or solution that's gonna solve all your problems, to actually realizing that it is a never-ending story. It's gonna be continuous journey for you.
Yeah, and keep in mind, I'm a knucklehead from Wyoming. I mean, I am not that smart of a guy. So
I think you're being too modest.
I appreciate that. To have that constant feedback from people around me is really helpful. It's almost like I'm taking my teacher with me. Learning a language, I learned to ask a lot of questions on the street. I learned to ask people, hey, where's this? Where's that? How do you say this? How do you say that? What's this thing that I'm trying to think of the word? I just really got over that. I'm like, I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to mess it up. And my learning is going to accelerate as a result. Once that clicked, that was probably my first facet of life, as we're talking about this, to go from being that have the right answer or don't raise your hand to...
And it's a wrap. We dare you. If you are bold enough, hit subscribe, repost the rebellion, and don't miss out on next week's episode. It's going to be bloody brilliant. See you on the next one.